Dr. Kei Koga. Dr. Koga is an associate professor and the head of the Public Policy and Global Affairs program, School of Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University. Concurrently, he is a non-resident fellow at the National Bureau of Asia Research, the United States, and a member of the Research Institute for Peace and Security Research Committee, Japan.
Previously, he was a Japan scholar at the Wilson Center, visiting fellow at Center for Strategic and International Studies, and a postdoctoral fellow in the International Studies program, the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, Harvard Kennedy School.
He received his PhD in International Relations at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University. Currently, his research focuses on international security, international or regional institutions, particularly ASEAN, and East Asian or Indo-Pacific security.
Our next guest of honor is Professor Rohan Gunaratna. Professor Rohan Gunaratna is Professor of Security Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He received his master's from the University of Notre Dame in the United States, where he was Hesburgh Scholar, and his doctorate from the University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom, where he was British Chiefling Scholar.
The author of 30 books, including Inside Al-Qaeda, Global Network of Terror, University of Columbia Press, Professor Gunaratna edited the Insurgency and Terrorism series of the Imperial College Press, London. He's a trainer for national security agencies, law enforcement authorities, and military counter-terrorism units. Interviewed terrorists and insurgents in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Saudi Arabia, and other conflict zones. For advancing international security cooperation, Professor Gunaratna received the Major General Ralph H. van Dieman Award.
Once the panel discussion has commenced, please head to the microphones that are located in the center aisle of the hall and wait to be called upon by Kenneth before asking. We will now hand the time over to Kenneth to moderate the panel discussion. Kenneth, please.
Before we officially begin, can you just give a round of applause again to our professors for being with us here today? And the topic of our panel today will mostly revolve around the term international security, which I believe can be a rather large one to unpack and can lend itself to many various interpretations. So just to get a ball rolling, perhaps I could just ask both professors to tell us a little bit more about the interpretation of the term international security and how this concept has transformed over the years. Perhaps we'll hear from Professor Gunaratna first.
Good morning to all of you. International security is something very simple that all of you can remember. When Singapore was under very severe threat, that is the terrorists living in Singapore, they want to attack the American embassy, they want to bomb the American embassy, the British High Commission, the Australian High Commission, and the Israeli embassy in 2001. At that time, I had a meeting with Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew is the founder father of Singapore. He is your father too. So, Lee Kuan Yew told me something very interesting. He said that we have to protect Singapore from within, that is the threats to Singapore coming from inside Singapore. Because there may be some people in Singapore who are Singaporeans who want to harm Singapore. Harm means threaten, hurt Singapore. That is called protecting Singapore against those harms from within Singapore is called national security. So the threats that are out there is called international security. International security is an extension of national or domestic or internal security outside Singapore. So like we protect Singapore from terrorism, from crime, from COVID, health threats, from environmental degradation, right? From sea level rise. If there's a problem of food, from food security, reinforce agricultural security. The same we protect domestic or national security. Singapore also must contribute towards international security to stabilize the world out there. That is why Singapore sent a very small contingent of troops to Afghanistan to stabilize Afghanistan. Sent a very small group of troops to Iraq to stabilize Iraq. Because if terrorism increase overseas, the same terrorists will come here, right? So Singapore is committed both to national security, protecting Singapore from within, and international security, meaning reducing the threats, the challenges overseas. That is called international security. But international security is more than that. Not only Singapore, but the United Nations, other international organizations, they will all work together to reduce the global threat of terrorism, global threat from infectious diseases, global threat from criminal organizations, global threat from countries fighting each other. So all that is international security.
Thank you, Professor. First of all, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, and then thank you for the chair, putting the really interesting question. So the Professor Rohan actually talks about the kind of essence of the international security. But then so I actually add some of the conceptual evolution of the international security since perhaps we can actually call the Cold War, the 1950s and the 1940s. So I think at first we have to unpack international security here, right? What is the international and what is the security? And the security is something that you want to actually defend from defend. Like you have to question what do you want to defend from what kind of threat, in what way. So these are the kind of really framework that we can use. And the international, the term international, meaning it's more like the nation to nation. So basically in the Cold War era, we focused on the state-to-state relations. So let's say it's a Singapore, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, the United States, Soviet Union, China, Japan, these kind of the state as the primary actor. But then that was the really important kind of concept. International security was actually set in terms of the state-to-state relations, and then they were actually trying to defend their territories and then values from the other countries' threat. But then what happened after the Cold War is that they actually started to expand the concept. Because you could actually use the term security in many ways. And then you actually wanted to, when you look at the situation in the 1990s, no longer the Soviet and then also the US kind of confrontation are the biggest one. It's more like the ethnic kind of the conflict, religious conflict, environmental protection, piracy, transnational crime, these kind of things, right? So then international community started to tackle with these issues. And then as Professor Rohan emphasized, the importance of the international terrorism came into the, particularly when we faced the 9/11. The 9/11 is September 11, 2001. I'm not sure if you were born on that time, but that is the really, really big impact on the international security. And then we started to expand this concept. So now I think we include most of the different kind of the security issues. We call I think in Southeast Asia, people tend to define this in two ways. One is the traditional security. Traditional security is the state-to-state relations.
if you are talking about the geopolitical implications of the US-China strategic competition, then that is the traditional security. And then if you are talking about more kind of the piracy, the climate change, and refugee, the international terrorism, then that is a non-traditional security issue. So I think over time, the concept is evolving, and then they are expansive right now. So that's the
Thank you to both professors. I'm sure you've given a lot of food of thought to our delegates to think about how international security may simply be an extension of our domestic practices, and also how this term, this very broad term, has evolved over the years. And with that, I believe we have our first question for the day from a delegate. Delegate, if you would please step up to the mic, state your name, your council, as well as the question you have for our panelists here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sui Heng from Crisis. My question is more directed towards Dr. Koga. Do you assess the structure of the Japanese defense industrial base, particularly the presence of large conglomerates like Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, who produce significant amounts of civilian and military goods? Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate, for your question. Dr. Koga, would you like to answer the question?
Okay, so that's the pretty specific kind of question for the Japanese defense industry. So the Japanese defense industry, you know, like the Japanese kind of defense, the posture is defensive defense. So that the Japan doesn't really provide the arms and also the military equipment to the overseas before. During the Cold War, the Japanese government restricted the production of the arms and also the military equipment if they actually have the potential to become offensive. They stopped actually producing that. And then so there's the really kind of limited the capabilities that the Japan has for the defense industry. So the Japanese defense industry is pretty small. But then they are now, because of the change in the strategic environment in the East Asia, particularly rise of China, which the Japanese government focused on, Japan started to expand its military or defense capabilities. Even though still, Japanese government tried not to expand its arms to become too offensive. They were actually thinking about having a certain kind of strike capabilities, because it would be really important in terms of defending its own country. So in that sense, Japan is now expanding, but the problem is that still the demand is actually mainly within the domestic. So Japan calls its defensive force or military force the self-defense force, because those forces are only geared towards defending its own country. And then they have a particular kind of equipment. So defense industry in Japan is pretty limited, and it's not like that too kind of expensive. And then let's see how it goes in the future. Right now, the Japanese are trying to cooperate with the other countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Italy to facilitate the cooperation in terms of the defense equipment. So let's see how it goes. But I'm not sure this is a clear answer, but then it remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koga, for the very insightful analysis. Perhaps could we hear from the individual, the delegate standing at the mic?
Hello, I'm Snow from UNDP. So this question is directed to Professor Gunaratna. So you shared in a speech for the launch of your latest book, Sri Lanka's Easter Sunday Massacre. There was a quote that you mentioned, terrorism is a vicious byproduct of extremism. So I feel like many people often confuse religious extremism and terrorism for the same thing. So could you please share what are the overlaps between religious extremism and terrorism, as well as the distinctions between them? Thank you.
Your name is Snow. It's a very beautiful name. Let me share with you the difference between extremism and terrorism. If you are an extremist, you will only speak to people in your community. If you are an extremist, you will only speak to people who believe in your religious faith. If you are an extremist, you will only contact and communicate with people with the same mindset as you are. You will not tolerate, you will not entertain the views of others. You will not be a pluralist. Your ideology, your thinking, your belief system will be very narrow. So if that extremism increase, then you will want to attack the other, the person who is not thinking and believing and acting like you. Then you will start to harm and hurt, challenge and threaten the other. So extremism leads to violence. Extremism leads to terrorism. So how do we counter extremism? How do we counter terrorism? So the first phase of fighting terrorism is we must promote moderation, toleration, coexistence. Look at my colleague, he is Japanese.
But I'm not an extremist.
But I still love him.
Thank you, Professor, for the response. And I'm happy to see such a high degree of engagement from delegates. But could we perhaps hear from the delegates sitting in front of the mic? Right in front of me. Thank you.
I am Daniel from G20. So, what is your opinion on the Israel-Palestine war? Do you feel like it's a war on religious stances or a war on territorial stances? And after that, would you say, like, what do you think the ideal solution for both countries is?
Thank you, Delegate, for your question. Professors, would you like to answer the question? Professor, I want you to go first.
Israel-Palestine conflict is a 75-year-old conflict. It's very ancient. The Israelis could have easily solved this problem by creating a separate state for the Palestinian people. But Israel was focusing on the immediate threat of terrorism. Israel was addressing the immediate threat of terrorism. So, Israel should have also focused on the long-term threat of politically resolving the problems. Israel didn't do that. That is why this problem has become big. So if any of you have a problem, solve it now. Don't wait to solve it later, because it will become a big problem. So all your issues, solve it immediately, right? But not in a violent way. Try to address it beautifully, so that everyone will become a winner, right? Now let me tell you something else about the second part of the question. That is, the second part of the question is very interesting, right? Is it a religious war or is it a territorial war? Hamas, the group that attacked Israel on October 7th and took 240 people as hostages, killed 1,400 people. Its main motivation is to create a territory for the Palestinian people. But it wants to destroy the Israelis. because it's motivated out of extreme religious ideology. Right? So that is why the international community wants to dismantle and decimate Hamas. Israel wants to eliminate Hamas because Hamas is a lethal, or what you call a deadly terrorist organization. When Jama Islamiyah, the terrorist group in Singapore, want to attack the diplomatic missions, want to bomb the Yeshun MRT station, want to attack the Changi airport, want to attack the Sambawang naval base, Lee Kuan Yew, he was minister mentor, he decided at that time to dismantle this group. And Singapore government has done it. The Ministry of Home Affairs, the Internal Security Department, the Singapore Police Force, they have totally disintegrated that organization. So threats or individuals, entities that can harm you, you have to dismantle it. That is national and international security. Thank you very much.
Just quickly here. So adding on that, I think there are many different kind of perspectives on this war. So I'm not really expert on the Middle East kind of conflict and then Israel-Hamas the conflict. But you need to know what is the cause of this conference and this conflict, right? I guess the how actually and also want to see this. Is it actually, are you seeing this conflict from the Hamas attacking Israel? Or is it actually, there are some people or some countries which actually see this is a more kind of fundamental root cause? Like, there are some fundamental root cause out there. So when you are actually asking this question, probably it would be better to see the conflict from the many different lenses. And then how the other actually see this conflict. Because again, there are so many different opinions in the world. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you, both professors, for your illuminating remarks. Could we hear from the delegates standing at the mic at the back? The one in the red blazer, thank you.
Alright, hi, I'm Joe, I'm from ITU, and I would like to ask, Article 51 of the United Nations Security Council Charter states that every country has the right to self-defense until the Council has taken the measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. But then would that mean that the country attacked can basically resort to retaliation as a form of deterrence to the attacker country and still call this self-defense? How do you justify this?
Right. So the United Nations. Thank you for that. Really important question. Like when you think about the definition of the self-defense, right? Because the self-defense is the definition of concept of self-defense is so elusive. So that nobody actually say, "Oh, we are going to attack," and then this country and they invade this attack. People always say, we are doing this for their own, their own self-defense, right? So that's a really, really important kind of thing that we need to actually understand. And then in the United Nations, then the assumption is that you are not going to attack. Preemptive attack is not going to be allowed. And then you are actually just being there. And then if you get attacked physically, that means you are going to retaliate. And then you have the self-defense right. Sometimes collective self-defense right with the other country to defend your territory and also sovereignty. So in that sense, that is the kind of the split of the United Nations the Charter 51, Article 51. But some countries actually try to expand the definition. And then they would actually say maybe because we need to preempt the attack, or we need to actually do something before they attack us. So they actually started to use the defense in a different way. So I know like this is really controversial and this is really difficult to solve. But then this is the right question because the United Nations Charter is giving you the principle. But at the same time, what you want to interpret, how you're gonna interpret, actually depends on you, and also depends on what will actually happening in the international relations and the international environment. So my interpretation might be going to be different from your generation's interpretation, and then this is how you are actually going to shape the international order. So keep asking this kind of question because this is really, really important. Thank you.
And now can we hear from the delegates standing right in front of me?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, sirs. I appreciated the speech just now. It was excellent. So this question is for Professor Rohan in particular. I agree that international stability is important for Singapore's well-being in the long run. But in my opinion, we also have to recognize that Singapore is incredibly small with limited resources. Singapore is important, but I believe that we don't hold a high international standing that is enough to be able to make any big strides in terms of brokering peace in the world. I would like to hear about your opinion on that. Thank you.
Singapore is a mini superpower. Don't underestimate Singapore. It is true that your land territory is limited. Your population is small. But your leaders are not corrupt. Look at Malaysia. Look at Thailand. Look at Philippines. Look at Indonesia. Can you compare the leaders of those countries, their intellect, to the leaders of Singapore?
Are the leaders getting called down? Oh my god.
Singapore leaders are brilliant. All of you will also become like those leaders, brilliant. Because you go to St. Joseph's.
We don't
Not everyone is from St. Joseph's Institution. We come from a variety of different backgrounds in school.
But you go to Singapore schools. And Singapore teachers are very good. If you misbehave, they will.
That was his generation, right? Our generation no have.
I want you to know that the quality of leadership is everything. So if you have good leaders who are not corrupt, who are intelligent, right? You are a superpower. Leadership is all that. It's not the size. It is not the population, right? So what matters is the quality of all of you, the quality of leadership. Look at your economy. Singapore dollar is one of the strongest currencies in the world, right? So you are a superpower. You are a hub for mediation. You are a hub for negotiation. You are a hub for arbitration, right? You have produced some of the finest diplomats, some of the finest political leaders. If Lee Kuan Yew was born in the West, he would have been like Churchill or like Roosevelt or like de Gaulle, right? So I believe that you have played an important role internationally, and you can even play an important role in the future. All of you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the opening remark. Could we hear from the delegate at the mic behind? Delegate, do you have a question you would like to ask?
Hi, I appreciate your speech earlier, and this is to both of the guests of honors, right? So I come from CLU, and my question is, how reliable of a partner should Singapore see the EU as, given the EU's history of perpetuating the narrative that the EU's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not the EU's problems?
Are you actually referring to the Indian foreign minister's speech about the? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like, this is the kind of reality, right? In the world, there are all the kind of those advanced democracies and advanced countries, which kind of like to some extent largely shape the narratives of the international politics. So like when they actually face this certain kind of like issues that could actually affect them, like Europe or like the United States or more like other advanced countries, they actually took that as the kind of major news. While like there are so many kind of like other news that could affect severely to the European countries. So I guess this is the things that we actually confront like as a reality. And then but then what I actually can find out right now is this is actually a completely different situation from the past. I mean, if you live in the 1980s or 1980s, like those were taken for granted because the major news kind of the companies were dominated by those advanced countries, and then we never actually heard not anything like too much about the other the situations. But then since like we have the SNS and then also like the other social medias, and then also we have the different kind of like outlets of the information dissemination, then probably like you can actually spread those kind of like kind of biased perspective, right? So I guess this is the thing like we can promote change. Like there are certain kind of like the issues that like because if they know, they will actually have to change too. Because even if you are actually repeating probably like European countries or the United States repeating the same narrative, then it doesn't actually gain any support from the other countries. So I think I think like that's not like really fair. But again, I think like the things like we could actually change if the individuals that like we can actually do something about. Like right now, like this is the kind of like you have many tools, so that like we can actually promote those kind of like the different perspectives and the different ideas to the world. So that's what I would say.
Now, can we hear from the delegate in the brown blazer, please? Please say a question.
Hi, professors. I'm Isaac from UNSC, and my question is, do you think life revolves around diplomacy, or do you think diplomacy revolves around life?
I'm sorry, Khalid, could you please rephrase the question?
In your opinion, do you think life revolves around diplomacy, or do you think diplomacy is directly affiliated towards life?
His question is whether life revolves around diplomacy. No, diplomacy is just one component. Because the primordial, the basic human instinct is what? It is to fight, it is to compete, it is to commit aggression. But education, teaching, culture, values have made us diplomatic, to be nice to each other, right? You go to school, you are trained every day from morning to afternoon to be good, to be nice. But if you look at civilizations before, people constantly fought against each other. So it depends on the education you receive. It depends on the values that you have, your kindness, your compassion. All that comes because of your parents, because of your teachers, because of the rules and regulations built by your leaders. So diplomacy is one part of life, how to deal and engage with others. But other instruments are there, military force, right? Intelligence capabilities. So look at China, look at the United States, look at Russia, look at these extremist organizations. They all have different dispositions. But look at Japan. Japan during World War II was very aggressive. Japan could not be controlled. That's why the Americans bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After that, the Japanese are very diplomatic. They even don't want to have an aggressive defense force. And I have told my Japanese friends in the Prime Minister's office, in the Cabinet office, in the intelligence community, no, you must have a defense force to defend yourself from North Korea, from your other aggressive countries around you. So you must understand there's a time for diplomacy and there's a time for aggression. If Indonesia and Malaysia are threatening Singapore, can you be diplomatic? Your aeroplanes will go and bomb the planes of your neighboring countries when they are on the tarmac, even before they take off. So you must understand, to protect a nation state, to protect the security of a country, including Singapore, it must have very capable military and intelligence and law enforcement capabilities. It must have very kind and compassionate diplomats, but also very intelligent leaders. So life is like that. You have to be strong and capable, but you have to be kind and compassionate too. Thank you very much.
Alright. Thank you. So I kind of okay. So at the end, probably I kind of agree with the last part. I mean, you have to be really careful. I guess what I actually want to say is that yes, the history matters a lot, and then but then there are certain, like if you talk about the particular thing, like the nuclear weapons also, right? I mean, like this is actually has many implications in the civil society and also the government. I kind of I agree that like the Japan was really aggressive like in the World War II, and then that was the kind of consequence in Japan actually got. But then when it comes to the particular issue like nuclear weapons and nuclear attack, right? Then is it really kind of like justifiable? Like this is something like we might want to actually ask the question, right? Because the nuclear weapon doesn't discriminate. Like there's a certain kind of rule of engagement in the war. Like you can actually attack military by military. But then like are you actually okay to attack the civilians? Maybe not, right? And then like nuclear weapon doesn't really discriminate that. So I think like this is the kind of something like okay, so the world is not like that really simple. It's more complicated than that. So we need to actually see the issue by issue. And then when we talk about it, like you actually also think about what kind of consequences you get, right? It's not like just you can actually get I mean, you feel good and then so you say something, but it's not. So I think like you have to be really careful when you are actually dealing with the international politics and also diplomacy too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for insightful remarks. Perhaps could we hear from the delegates at the mic at the back?
Hi, I'm Russell from UNSC. I'd like to ask, in a world that's increasingly becoming digitalized, for example, on the internet one can find footage of the current wars going on, the war in Syria, the war in Ukraine, or the Israel-Palestine war. People can find footage of war footage within all these sites, and with sites like Twitter, inspiring, helping the Arab Spring revolutions of 2016. With such modes of information dissemination, how will world governments cope in this increasingly open and public landscape?
Digital domain must be controlled very tightly. It is because in the digital space there is a lot of fake news, online falsehoods and manipulations by interested parties, disinformation campaigns. I'll give you a very good example. The religious fanatics staged a terrorist attack in Sri Lanka, attacked hotels and churches, killed 275 innocent people. But 53% of the Sri Lankans recently said during a survey that they don't believe that this attack is mounted by religious fanatics. That is why Singapore enacted the law. What is the name of that law? Yes, it's called the Protection Against Online Falsehoods and Manipulations. So if any of you fabricate false news or deliberately distribute false news, you will be investigated and you will be prosecuted. So I want you to know the information space is a sacred space. We must protect it. We must treasure it. Because that space is influencing others. It can influence your children, your brothers and sisters, to go and attack others, to have different opinions about others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate, for the question. And I think we have time for 2 more questions. So can I please hear from the delegate, standing from me, the black blazer. Thank you, Delegate, for saying your question.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. I'm from Crisis. So this question is directed to the panel. I would like to ask, what do you think would be the geopolitical implication of the expansion of BRICS, and what would the process of de-dollarization of the US dollar look like?
Thank you. So the BRICS the cooperation in terms of the economic and then also the development issues, it's significant. I think like it actually gives the more kind of attention to the so-called like the global south, that is the emerging countries and then also developing countries. And that actually gives you the more kind of attention to the so-called their voices, right? I mean, like, as I said like previously, the voices from the European side and also the US are kind of like to some extent dominant previously. But then the BRICS actually gives the certain kind of different voices in the international community. So I think like that is probably like the one the important thing, because you can actually diversify your kind of perspective too. But at the same time, like to what extent they could actually cooperate economically with different partners. Because I mean, if you look at China, Brazil, the Russia, and then South Africa, those are the countries that are not like necessarily cooperating economically with each other. I mean, they actually created the other so-called new bank, the institution, but that's pretty much it, right? Economically, can they actually facilitate free trade? We are not sure. And can they actually create certain kind of financial capabilities to be the center of the global finance? I don't know. So I think like there are lots of the things that like they need to work on. So, but then I guess the political intention of the BRICS is, I think, like really interesting, because they are actually trying to provide the alternatives of what we are actually having right now. So I guess that's something the BRICS is important about.
Thank you, delegate. Please return to your seat, and we will be taking one final question from the delegate in the brown blazer. Thank you, delegate. Please say your question.
Thank you, Colonel, for your earlier statement and your monologue. I thought it was really intriguing what you said about nation building. So I have a question that's more directed to Professor Rohan. Especially, apologies, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Rick, I'm a Malaysian delegate of France in the UNSC. And I'm curious of what are your thoughts on what makes effective nation building. Essentially, what distinguishes conflict-torn places and quote-unquote failed states, such as Afghanistan, from miracle states such as Singapore, as you mentioned earlier, other than good leaders? Because in essence, every state is gifted differently. Singapore is gifted with a geographical location, and some other failed states are gifted with massive oil reserves such as Venezuela, and yet they are still failed states. So what do you think are the effective conditions that create an effective nation building initiative?
Thank you, delegate, for the preamble, but could you please state your question in a more concise manner for our panelists? Thank you, delegate.
Essentially, what do you think makes effective nation building, other than good leaders?
Nation building is to keep the ethnic and the religious communities together. Nation building is to manage the resources very intelligent. Nation building is to prevent corruption. Nation building is to build national security that will give you social stability, political harmony, and economic prosperity. Nation building is working together. So if Singapore did not have that vision where they said that irrespective of our ethnic and religious groups, we will work together to build Singapore, give that beautiful ideology. Do you think Singapore will be what it is today? Look at Indonesia. It developed a beautiful ideology called Pancasila. Right? So every leader must fight against religious extremism in Indonesia, because every year the political parties, some extremist parties, are saying we don't want Pancasila. So nation building is once again working together. But to do this, you need strong leaders. You need visionary leaders. You need leaders who don't think about themselves, their personal and political interests, but will work for the interests of the people, for the nation. They will not compromise national goals for personal interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before we wrap up our panel for today, I would just like to invite both of our panelists to give some final closing remarks and words they have to say to our participants.
Again, thank you very much for having me here, and then also all the questions are really important. And then I would actually say when you are doing the international projects, and then when you are actually meeting the people from the other countries, and then when you are actually talking to the people who have the completely different values, then there are certain kind of the issues you need to be really, really careful about. That's the kind of diplomacy, right? And then this is actually the preparatory, the modern United Nations. So I think when you are actually doing this, you have to be also aware of that kind of reality. And then one probably different kind of statement may actually change the course of the action of the others. So there are always the diplomats and then also those kind of people who are working for the country are really, really careful about how you actually interact with the others. So I hope again thank you for your questions, and I hope you could actually learn these kind of experiences and I hope like you gonna actually be the future diplomats like in the Singapore and then beyond. Thank you so much.
My Japanese colleague is a very precious colleague because his heart is out of gold. He wants to make peace and harmony. He wants you to become diplomats. He has spoken about your professional life. I want to speak to you about your personal life. That is, you're of a different generation. You are in the first quarter of your life. I am in the last quarter of my life.
Oh no. Oh no.
So I want to share 3 things with you. One is, if you study and if you work hard and if you think smart, all of you can become leaders without exception. One of you or 2 of you may even win a Nobel Prize.
Whoa.
Right? One of you can become a prime minister. You can become a minister. You can become a CEO of a top company. Huge potential, huge opportunities for all of you. But this is your professional life. But your personal life, you have to manage it very carefully. First thing is your parents. Your parents are your living gods. You must never hurt them. You must never harm them, even if they are unreasonable with you. So I would like all of you to treasure your parents, because they will be not with you every moment. My father is 90 years old and my mother is 85 years old. So I traveled with my father. I took him to Machu Picchu in Peru. I took him to see the pyramids in Egypt. I took him to Tibet in China. I took him to Uzbekistan to see Samarkand and Bukhara. Right? I spent time with them. So remember to treasure your parents. They are your living gods. There's no substitute for building that love and relationship with your parents and your loved ones. The third aspect I want to share with you is with your colleagues. You can see how friendly we are. We may disagree, but we are friends. We may have differences of opinion, but we will reflect on each other. When I spoke about nuclear weapons, the Americans bombing Japan, it hurt him. It hurt me too, because I have been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I have seen the devastation of nuclear weapons. I myself want all of you to work against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Because, as he said, it's an indiscriminate weapon. It is like terrorism. Right? So all of you have a lot of work to do in the world, because the world is gravitating from a phase of stability and peace into an era of chaos and crisis. So all of you can play an important role to restore social harmony, bring about political stability, and work towards economic prosperity. Fly like an eagle, develop a 360-degree vision, travel and see the world, meet people, and build a peaceful world. Thank you very much.
So today we've heard extensively from our professors, and I'd just like to thank our panelists once again for their brilliant remarks and brilliant insights they have shared with us today. So just to briefly summarize all that we've gone through today, so at the at the very beginning of this panel, our panelists have defined for us what international security means to them, and they have also kind of explained how this term and this concept has evolved throughout the many years. And we also discussed the idea of religious extremism and the distinction between religious extremism and religious terrorism, and certain ways that we can go about combating terrorism and weeding out insurgents in our daily lives. And of course, we also discussed the importance of various international organizations such as the EU and the BRICs and the role in our world today, and how diplomacy and aggression are simply tools that we have at our disposal, which we must learn to will in order to shape a better tomorrow. And perhaps most memorably, we were introduced to this very interesting oxymoron, a maybe superpower, which refers to our little red dot here today. And we also realized the importance of good political leadership and how our true strength as a nation lies in the quality of our people. And I hope this is a reminder to every single delegate that you guys are the leaders of tomorrow, and with this kind of knowledge, you can lead Singapore to greater heights. Thank you all delegates, and can I get everyone to just give our panelists a round of applause again?
Thank you, Dr. Koga and Professor Gunaratna, for the insightful and very lively sharing, and delegates for your active participation. I'm sure we will be bringing these insights with us into the conversations that will be going on within our committee rooms in the next 4 days. With that, we would now like to invite our Secretary General, Mr. Kenneth Yin, to present our guests with a token of appreciation for the time spent with us here. This will be followed by a photo-taking session with everyone. Please remain seated.
Delegates, we will now be taking a group photo with everyone, and we will now pass the time over to the photographers to give instructions. Please do listen carefully.